So in this YouTube video, I'm going to be showing you how I did a sublimation tumbler. This is a 20 ounce straight skinny, and I used a graphic that I purchased from Design Bundles, and I also was able to combine it so that I added a name along the back and hid the seam. It's not completely hidden, but it's camouflaged pretty well. So what I started off doing is taking my original design, that was the one that you see on the right, and then I duplicated it and just lined the seam up next to it. Then I typed out my name, got it to the size that I wanted, and then I positioned that over top of where the seam is going to go. So once I did all of that, I'm going to take this into Procreate, and I'm going to use an airbrush brush that comes with the Procreate program, and I'm going to add a layer of just a softened white. I have to do it this way. I can't just add white to it because this is not vinyl. This is going to be printed, and I cannot print white, not on sublimation. So what I'm doing here is going ahead, I'm exporting it to my iCloud, and I'm going to export it as a PNG at full resolution. So now I'm on my iPad, I'm in Procreate, and I'm going to add this design to my screen, and I'm only using this for reference. So what I'm going to do is using the white and that airbrush, one of the small airbrush pens, I'm just going over top of the name. I just want to give it like a diffused look. So I want no harsh lines or anything like that, because it's going to be hard to line the back up in case there is something specific. I want to keep it very blurry, but I want to be able to cover up that seam. So once I did all that, I hid the background in my original graphic, and I'm only exporting that white diffused background. You can see that from the screen exactly what I'm exporting. So I'll go ahead and give it a new name, and apparently I could not think of what I wanted to name it here, so it took me a little bit. So I go ahead and finally figure out what I'm going to name it, and I save it again to my iCloud, and then I'm going to export this to my files, and I now have it back on my computer, and I'm working in Adobe Illustrator for this. So whenever I do these designs, I usually work between the two. Most of my layouts are done on Illustrator, and anything hand drawn or hand edited like that, I will take things over into Procreate. So what I did here was put that little background, that diffused background, I put it onto the screen, and I have centered it over those two lines where they're butted up against each other, and then make sure exactly where I want it to be. Now after I do that, I duplicated it, and I want to keep a copy. I sent a copy to the back, and I'm going to check again and make sure this is exactly where I want it. And then once I know that I am, I selected it, duplicated, and Command C, copy, and then paste in the back. So now I have selected the top copy and that graphic I had on the left hand side, and selected them both and grouped them, and then just moved them out of the way. And now I'm going to work on the part on the right hand side. So I took my top copy of that diffused white background and grouped it with the mom graphic. Now I'm going to work just with that. So what I'm going to do now is I want to make a clipping mask. So I want to clip off all of that excess of that white graphic that I just made. I don't need that. I only want the part that is going to fit right over top of that right hand side or that left hand side of the graphic. So I put my rectangle up, and then I put it on top, select both, and Command 7 or clipping mask. And then I'm going to hide this, and I'm going to do the same thing with the other side. So I have my graphic, or my little diffused, that diffused graphic that I made on Procreate. I have it still in the same place. You don't want to move that. And those things are grouped together. And then again, just like the other side, I'm going to get my rectangle, and I'm going to put my rectangle right over top of the mom graphic, and I'm going to use that for my clipping mask again. So I'm clipping off that excess that was on the right hand side. So now I have a left side and I have a right side. So after I get that done, I'm going to turn the bottom copy, which would be the other side of this graphic, back on, and then I'm going to go back to my clipping masks again. I want to have that white diffused. I need to have one part of it on the left and one part of it on the right, so that whenever I print them and they wrap around the cup, they're going to meet in the middle and they'll be in the right spot. So now I'm going to work with the top piece, and I'm going to use my clipping mask, and I'm going to clip off and keep only that left section that has the white background. The rest of it can go, because I have my bottom copy underneath that has the clipping mask that has the white background on the other side. So now when I did that, I basically kind of erased half of the design, and I have a duplicate underneath, so now they will come together. So I'm gonna group them both together. You can see I moved it out of the way just so you could see that, yeah, they're both there. So now we group them both together, and I can move them wherever I want. So I'm going to move it out of the way, and then I'm going to put my name. I'm using I'm printing on a legal size paper, so there's plenty of room that I can print off my name that I'm going to add second, and also the wrap. So the last thing I'm going to do is, before I get ready to print this, I'm going to add a small border. It is much easier to cut this out if I can see what I'm doing. So I'm just gonna make that to a light gray. I don't want it very dark, but I need to be able to see it. There's too much white on this design to end up and get the cut uneven. So I did all that, and now I'm going to go to my presets and do all the magic I need to do so that I can print this, and I am ready to send it to my printer. Okay, so now I have it printed, and through the magic of video, I will speed this boring part up while I cut all of this out. So I'm going to cut along those edges that has that gray border, and be very, very careful. You have to get, if you put a colored border so that you have a guide of exactly where you need to cut, make sure that you get all of that ink off. Anything that is left when you press, it's going to show up on your cup. So, all right, so that is cut out, and I'm just giving a quick look at it to see that it does fit and everything kind of blends together like I was wanting. So once that's done, I will go ahead and turn the paper around and get it taped real good to my cup. And must be careful to make sure and get it nice and tight. You don't want any loose places, any places that didn't adhere very well or anything like that. So it's better to err on the side of caution and use more tape than what you think you need, rather than not use enough and end up with a messed up cup. So I am going to get this taped down real well. And then for this first part, I'm going to go ahead and put this in the oven. I'm going to do this in the oven for this part, because I made the mistake of not cutting my Tumbler wrap, not cutting it to the size I should have. Normally for these tumblers, I do 9.3 inches by 8.1, but that graphic that I purchased from Design Bundles for some reason was like 8.2, so I went ahead and went with it, but it was a little bit too long. So anyway, I processed it in the toaster oven instead. So this is finished, and I will go ahead and get this out and get this paper off of it. It was not easy. It was pretty hot, and these are new gloves that I purchased, and they are terrible, to tell you the truth. The ones I had before was a whole lot better. I had to take this to my kitchen because it was just too hot to hold on to. So I'll go ahead and get all of this plastic wrap pulled off of it and get my tape loosened and get all this paper off of this cup. I don't like to leave it on there because I feel like I run the risk of having getting ghosting or something like that from paper moving, so I want to get that off there as fast as possible. So now I can go ahead and clean up the edges. Okay, so after I finish that, now I need to go back and I have to put the name on. So I'm gonna do this part a little bit different. For the whole tumbler, you know, as you could see, I put it in that little convection oven. But for this one, I have a new heat press that I'm gonna try out. This is the very first time I've used it, but I'm gonna give it a try and hopefully this will work. So right here, I'm just gonna trim down around the name because it's kind of hard to see exactly where I'm putting it. You know, you can't see through the paper very well, and you definitely can't see through the cup. You know, so it's hard to determine exactly where that background is. So you just kind of have to, you know, use your best guessing and determine where you think it's going to go. But that's another reason that I did the diffuse background and not, you know, stark white specific place, because you have a little bit of room for error. You can be off a little bit and you would never notice because it doesn't look like everything blends in, so it's not gonna stick out. Okay, so after I got the name put on there, this is a piece of blowout paper. You're gonna need this because I'm gonna be heating this tumbler again for a second time, and when you heat this, you are going to have ink transfer, and you don't want it to transfer on your press, and you don't want it to end up messing up what you already have. So this is the tumbler press that I just got, and this is my first time using it, so you'll have to bear with me because I'm not 100% sure of the settings yet. I'm still playing around with it, but I decided to do this at 365, and then initially I had it set for 60 seconds, but I kind of wasn't sure if 60 seconds was going to be enough, so you'll see here in the video that I added an extra 20 seconds. So all in all, I ended up pressing this at 365 for 80 seconds. So now I'm just waiting for the press to reach the temperature that I have set, and it has. The little sign says to heat it with the mug. I've never done that before, but that's what it says to do, and I'm actually going to follow directions for the first time. Okay, so I'm ready to put my mug in. It's at the temperature I set it at, and I'm going to be very careful not to put the seam where I have that blowout paper. I don't want that seam to be on the heating element. I'm afraid that it's going to cause one section to get warmer than the other where the seam where the paper's doubled over, and I don't know if it will make a line through the design that I already made, and I don't want it to take up excess ink. So I'm going to keep that off of the heating element, and I'm just going to heat the rest of it. So right now I really just want to press the name. Everything else is done. So I really just want to get the name on there. but I'm going to keep that seam off. At least keep the heat off of the seam. So you'll be able to see, I'm going to go ahead and unwrap it, and you'll be able to see on the paper what I meant about why I use the blowout paper. You can see where it transferred. So that ink has transferred from it being heated again. And without the blowout paper, if I stuck that in the press, I'm going to have ink all over my press. So now I'm going to take the name, and this was the only part I was actually printing. And you can see that the name printed, you don't see very much of the seam because that white diffused background kind of covers it a little bit, and it makes the name stick out a little bit. So this is it. This is the finished tumbler, and that is the background with the seam that's been camouflaged.